medication. Baby, stop your crying. We could go to school and earn diplomas, but it ain't gonna teach me how to get to know you. We could work all day, earn lots of money, but it ain't gonna teach me how to love you, honey. So tell me what's good with what is bad. We could talk about the good love we had. Is this an actual culmination?
Hello and happy 2019. Welcome to the first edition of the year of WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Justin Farmer and Lauren Garrett make our community tick. They are members of the Hamden Legislative Council. They've taken an active role in some pressing decisions lately, with more looming on the horizon in 2019. Welcome to WNHH, Lauren and Justin. Thank you for helping us get the year started.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
And Justin, I'm going to ask you to get so close to that mic. Okay. And Lauren a little closer too, so you're almost touching it.
All right.
We're not doing any lipstick inspections after. Everything's fine. And we also want to thank Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So how were your holidays? Were you folks busy getting constituent calls, or did you get a little break?
A little bit.
Yeah. No. I'm happy everyone knows where to find me, especially during the holidays.
Right. I got a little bit of both, constituent calls and time with the family. A lot of book reading to the little guy. So
Good.
It's good.
Oh, I love booking with the guy. My grandson was there reading some. Yeah. But, I felt like as December careened to an end, as the year careened to an end, so much was going on in Hamden. I mean, we'll get to this later in the show, including a once-in-a-generation restructuring of the entire school system.
Right.
It still has some loose ends up, as well as questions being raised about budget and taxes and structural deficits.
Yep.
So how are things going in Hamden in general these days? You're getting a view from the inside now. I think you're both first-term legislators, right?
Yes.
We are.
Rookies. And you have 2-year terms, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're about to start. So how did your first year go? Did it change the way you think about your town?
It was intense. It was fast-paced and so much going on in town right now. We had a budget that was very difficult because we took a very active role in making sure that we were getting our revenues more in line with what we could expect, so that we would have a budget that would end with a balanced budget and hopefully even a surplus. The jury's out on whether or not that'll happen.
We're halfway through the year now.
Right.
Fiscal year.
And then, of course, we did have the restructuring of the schools, which was a lot of meetings, community involvement. I'm the chair of the education committee, so I did a lot of, I went to all the meetings and communicating between the Board of Education and the council and community members, making sure everybody understood what was going on in town. So and then on top of that, we have our POCD, our Plan of Conservation and Development, to decide, what we're going to look like, what Hamden will look like 10 years into the future.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. Because Hamden and New Haven are two of the few places in Connecticut that are growing.
Right.
Not huge. It's not like armies are coming into the city and setting up bivouacs. But, you got more housing going on, more density, more issues about the infrastructure.
Growth is growth.
Yeah. So, Justin, what have you felt in your first year? What was it like?
It was a major transition for me. From still being a student, but going
at
from
Southern Connecticut State University.
going from student activist to activist elected official was a transition I'm still navigating. We have all the issues of town council, and I sharing the border between Hamden and New Haven. I've found myself sometimes in New Haven, talking about regionalization and talking about issues that extend beyond the border. Um, that's just something that I realized that
Well, we always saw you at social justice protests in New Haven. I don't know if we see you more now, if we just see you as much, but now you're a councilman, so now you have sort of this title when you go. My favorite one was when anti-police brutality activists in New Haven stormed City Hall. And there, all of a sudden, Justin had always been in those crowds, and this was the end of December. And this time, he was the councilman, even though it was from Hamden. And he ends up, didn't you end up kind of negotiating with the local police and the activists?
I did.
That was fun.
It was a new position for me because I have so many mentors there at City Hall. So to kind of conversate as equals and peers was different when so much of the time I've gone to them looking for their wisdom where that
Who's
went
them?
gone. So like Esther, Lawrence.
Esther Armand, the legislative ad, Lawrence, the spokesman for the mayor,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they're there, not happy with your group that had sat in, and all of a sudden you're kind of the bridge.
Yeah, and I think we need more of that where I knew from working with many of those activists like Carrie where it was simple. All we needed to do is to reach HARP and set up a
The
date
mayor Harp, yeah.
and everyone would be fine and everyone would go home and nothing would escalate. For some reason the police ended up blocking the door and that just escalated everything.
Made good pictures, which was sort of the journalistic goal in all those.
I'm happy we could help.
And we're talking about Hamden coming up in the year 2019 with two fired up new members finishing their first year, going to their second on the Legislative Council, Justin Farmer and Lauren Garrett. So I hadn't known about this plan of conservation and development. So this is a plan, is it the city government, town government is putting together about the next 10 years of what Hamden's going to look like?
The Planning and Zoning Commission has contracted with a firm to poll community members and residents to determine what we want to see in our own community moving forward.
And what's the firm?
Oh,
It's
do you
okay.
remember?
You don't remember.
Firm. It's not firm in my mind.
Oh,
Okay. But in any case, when did this start?
planometrics?
No problem. And when did this start?
Oh,
Say 3 months ago.
something like maybe a little bit longer.
And what was the impetus for it? Was it the fact that Hamden's growing, and part of the beauty of Hamden is you have a lot of open space. It's both a suburb and kind of urban, right?
Right.
And was that the impetus that you got more people and you want to figure out what's going to keep it Hamden, but also work and change?
Well, we're required to do this every so often. The last few times it's been small amendments to the overall plan, and this time around we're doing more of a
Holistic.
holistic plan.
Is there an official plan of conservation and development in the town?
Yes, so it has to get updated every, I think, 5 years.
Every
something like
5
that.
years. Every 10 years is usually more of a major overhaul.
Sort of like the way we do property reassessment.
Yeah.
So what does that look like to each of you? What is the big challenge? What needs to be figured out?
Well, the big challenge is making everybody happy. Like in any other approach, we need to make sure that we are conserving land and growing because our community is growing, and we have to do it in a very thoughtful way. So making sure that we're not putting a burden on one community over another community, and just doing it in a really thoughtful way.
Yeah, for me, Hamden is going through a major transition. Probably in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be a predominantly, it will probably be a city more than a town. It will be predominantly people of color, which historically has never happened in Hamden.
Mm-hmm.
For me, having those conversations of making sure that we have a good urban center and making sure that there are connections with transportation, extracurricular activities, and having a hub and a sense of community in Southern Hamden as well as in northern Hamden being able to preserve some of that open space. This is the time now to have those thoughtful conversations
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think have happened as forthcoming in the past, and that's what I'm hoping
Now,
to.
one thing that's because the New Haven Independent is starting to cover Hamden more in a news sense and on the radio, and part of what we feel like is that Hamden and New Haven are really one community in a way, but they're also distinct. Just like within New Haven, our neighborhoods are distinct, but we're part of a community. And one thing that really struck me coming in from the outside is that a big majority of your students of your schools are people of color,
Mhm.
Yep.
students of color.
Yeah.
And almost everyone making the decisions is white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the population of Hamden, what is it? How big is the minority population?
The minority population is just shy of 50% in Hamden.
And yet almost everyone who makes decisions, you and Verita and a few others and
Yeah.
Robin Porter, mostly everyone's white. That's a transition I saw covering New Haven over the last 40 years. As our population became majority minority, there was that catch up with
Yeah.
the people making the decisions. And you still have people of all races make decisions. There's plenty of white people, plenty of people of color from the beginning, but just that the sense that representation is a lag.
Yeah, I am the first, so I'm the majority whip. I'm one of the people in leadership. I'm the first person in almost a decade and a half. So since I've been born, there has been one person of color in a leadership position.
Who was that?
I forget her name. She was a former council president back in like 2003.
Mm-hmm.
I think 2001 to maybe like 2003. And that has been, I've been the first person since then. And there's only been 3 people of color in leadership positions in the history of town, excluding the former Mayor Scott Jackson.
Oh, that's right. Scott Jackson was African American. And what's so interesting is some of the issues you brought up in passing here. Now, you talk about you become more urban, so it's going to be denser, right?
Yeah.
Now, isn't there a lot more housing being built sort of like by Lake Whitney, off of Whitney, between Whitney and Dixwell? Is that sort of where we're seeing the most intense densification?
Well, we are.
Meaning more housing than there used to be crammed together?
There definitely is. And part of that conversation is about affordable housing, which is
Mhm.
a larger conversation we need to have regionally. But
Does that mean Hamden, is this new housing going to be affordable? Who's going to live there?
you have some affordable housing. And the major concern I have, most of our affordable housing has been in the southern part of town.
Mm-hmm.
That happens to be more black and brown people, happens to be impoverished and lack of resources in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And having communities, our next door neighbor, Highwood neighborhood that I'm in, 6 houses over, is New Hallville. And having
Mhm.
residents travel back and forth between those communities, that doesn't really create stability. Having
Mhm.
access to have affordable housing throughout town and throughout the city is what's needed, and I don't hear those conversations going on.
What's your
at the-
take on that, Lauren? You're in Southern Hamden too, right?
No, I live in Northern Hamden.
In Northern Hamden, okay.
So it's the more, rural section of town.
Is
and
it Mount Carmel?
Westwoods.
Okay.
So there are
And that's
a lot
right by
of
the Farmington Trail there, right? Near
Yes.
the Cheshire border.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm on the trail too.
Oh, that's right. You're both on the trail, but you're in the New Hallville Trail. Oh, you're in Highwood, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people who are concerned about too much growth in Northern Hamden, and they push the burden on Southern Hamden for all of that growth. I think that we have to be very intentional about how we expand our affordable housing because it has to suit the community. So we need to make sure that we're looking towards putting affordable housing near the bus system.
Mm.
And I think that
That means near Dixwell and near Whitney.
yes, sure. But we also need to take a look at our transportation system as a whole.
And
We
do
have-
what? Get it on different routes?
Yes.
Like
So-
where would be an example of where we need new routes?
Well, we have we're with all of the school redistricting, we're going to be sending a lot of students over to Wintergreen.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the ability to get parents involved in the school and get them over to that school? We need to make sure that there's
So you think there's not adequate bus routes there?
not at all.
No
Yeah,
question.
there's no bus routes. Dixwell, it most of the time it stops at Coles, just about half a mile away from Town Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bus that comes every
Oh,
every
but you
other
could take
hour.
the Whitney Avenue bus to Town Hall.
Yes, but you have to switch over from Dixwell to Whitney, which means you either walk
Oh, if you're
half
coming
hour.
from that end, from your park. Because I know if we're coming from downtown, we go right on Whitney.
Yeah, so for me, it's faster to ride my bike from my house to Town Hall,
Mm-hmm.
or I can take Dixwell down to New Haven, and then transfer from there, take Whitney. But that takes an hour and a half to get to City Hall.
For how many miles?
We're talking about 5 miles, really, but you have to backtrack
Boy,
a little
that's
bit.
so much like New Haven. The routes are just outdated. That's an interesting challenge. So, you were talking about what belongs where. Now, first of all, affordable housing. Wouldn't it be accurate to say that in the northern part of Hamden, even though it's more rural and you haven't had the new affordable housing, you have had an expansion of student housing, which creates its own problems from Quinnipiac, correct?
Right.
That's affordable, right? The kids don't have a lot of money, or they just cram.
Oh,
They cram a
I
lot
wouldn't
of
say
them
it's
into the house.
affordable. No,
Because they cram them into the house and make a lot of
Right.
money on it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's another issue.
There's a need for housing in northern Hamden for the students for sure. That
Mhm.
is a continued issue that we, I'm hoping between Quinnipiac and ourselves and new administrations and new council people in general, that's something
Mhm.
that we can have adequate housing for students.
And how do you
also-
feel about that? Because you got folks in your neck of the woods don't really like having all those QU students in their loud parties, right?
Yeah. There are a lot of complaints about that. I've had there's a Quinnipiac house 2 doors down from where I live. The students have always been very nice. They're not noisy. I don't even notice the parties. It's not
Yeah, I
been
have one across my street with some Southern UNAs. They've been pretty good.
yeah, they're not that bad. They're good kids, just studying and
Yeah,
just like Justin.
Mhm.
of course.
So are you okay with expanding student housing where in your neck of the woods?
I think that if you're going to expand student housing and it's done closer to campus, I think that's of a really good benefit because then you're putting the students where they want to be anyway, close to campus.
Also, is your
close to
idea
their
now
friends.
is part of the problem that it's stretched out too much into other residential neighborhoods?
It doesn't need to be stretched out into other
But is it
residential.
now?
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit.
I have students in my area, and every once in a while, I'll get complaints over on Putnam about 10 cars in a driveway or blocking off other people's driveways.
Mm-hmm.
And they're Quinnipiac students. For the most part, they're not a problem, but it creates problems where if you have a house that's meant for 5 people, you have 10 people there, it gets tricky between
So are
cars.
those Southern students or QU students on
Those-
Putnam?
Those are QU students.
So it'd be nice if they were closer. That's so interesting. Now, you see, I hear solutions when I talk to you folks.
Hey,
I'm hearing bus routes that are reconnected so people can go to Wintergreen and to Town Hall.
Yeah.
I'm hearing that, yes, have more QU student housing, but have it closer to the campus.
Yeah.
So you could get some stuff done here. We just
We
started.
could.
This is just the first working day of the year.
when are you joining council, Paul?
No, I'm just listening to you folks. And we're listening on WNHH's Dateline New Haven program. And as of today in New Haven, we're considering Hamden and New Haven one community.
Hey,
And we're talking to Justin Farmer, Lauren Gart from the Legislative Council. We were talking, it was said in passing as we talked about this 10-year conservation plan, that you want to look at where the housing goes. And Justin mentioned that affordable housing has been concentrated in the southern part, and that's where poverty is concentrated. But you also mentioned that it's important to put the housing near services.
Yeah.
Lauren talked about the need to preserve open space, as did you, and a lot of the open spaces in the northern part of the town. I'm wondering if there might be a contradiction there. I mean, not a bad contradiction, but that in fact maybe we do want the growth in the south, but make sure it's supported by the services and preserve that open space in the north. What do you think about that?
so there's tons of open space in the south as well. We have the Quinnipiac River that runs through.
That's right. And the Quest. Oh, you have Farm to Canal. You have the West Rock.
You have Edgerton Park, which is maybe 7 blocks away from me. This massive old home with a carriage house, beautiful park. And then, you have the powder farm. You have the old powder farm over off of Whitney, which is expansive amount of land. There's tons of work to be done on that, but you could potentially have canoeing and hiking trails, and it would connect to some of this new development that might be affordable housing and a office.
So you'd
share
like to see the
space.
canoeing hiking trails at the powder farm?
Yeah, I think you could connect that and preserve. I think there's a fallacy that we believe that open space only exists in northern Hamden. There's plenty of open space in southern Hamden,
Mm-hmm.
and
Where exactly is the powder farm?
So the powder farm is between. The powder farm is close to. It's by the old Hamden Middle School, so it's around Newhall and Putnam.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a massive land, acres of land.
And you'd like to see canoe trails and
well, you
what
can have like
canoeing and hiking trails that connect to affordable housing in that area.
yeah, but we're talking about millions upon millions of dollars of restoration, where we don't have the money, but we haven't worked on finding a way to make that work.
So you're saying there might be conservation money that doesn't have to come out of taxpayers?
Yeah, and it's a regional source and a regional gem that you can bring people to. The same way that we have Sleeping Giant. I would never want to see anything change the dynamics of the neighborhood so much that you couldn't enjoy Sleeping Giant, because that's something that regionally it brings us together.
Mm-hmm. More? Now, what
s-
about northern Hamden? Would you want to see it without a lot more housing because of preserving that rural character?
Not necessarily. So one of the things that's been suggested in the POCD was putting some sewers in northern Hamden along Whitney Avenue. I think it's north of Mount Carmel, something like that, all the way to Cheshire. There are no sewers, and we can't really
Is it
have.
north of Whitney?
It's on Whitney Avenue,
North
of Mount Carmel, around QU.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't have much development without the sewers. And I think that you do need to give people a reason to stop on Whitney Avenue coming from Cheshire. So it's something that we need to look into and just make sure that we're doing it in an intentional way.
I've been hearing about that because I was talking to people. And by the way, Tabitha Logan checked in with some claps. Happy New Year, Lex Watkins with a heart. Thanks for listening. And Tom Ficklin here on Dateline New Haven at WNHH FM. So I wanted to ask you about that, Lauren. Northern Hamden, I've heard people talk about a frustration on the Regional Economic Development Group of trying to lure more business to build your tax base, since taxpayers are stressed in Hamden, you have growth, and that it's hard to locate commercial enterprises in the northern part of Hamden because of that lack of sewers. Isn't that the biggest? Because then you have to pay to put in your own septic system, right?
Right.
So,
And
how would you bond for that, or is because you were worried about borrowing in Hamden?
right. There's a way that you can put in some more infrastructure and do it in collaboration with businesses and private enterprises. So this is TIF financing.
Tax increment financing.
Yes. And
Is that based on future profits that you get? That's always a little dicey.
it's a little, yeah, it's difficult to start that, and it's difficult to figure out how we're going to manage all of that and who we're going to work with, but it's possible. And Quinnipiac is a partner here. So what the POCD suggested for Whitney Avenue was to have like a Quinnipiac zone kind of, and so we would have some like small walkable shopping district along Whitney Avenue, and it makes it safer. You slow down traffic a little bit with a walkable shopping
So
district.
you're talking about having a more urban style campus. I mean, it's not always big cities. Small cities that have universities often, like as New Haven has done, Cambridge, Stanford, Princeton, you get a commercial district that's walkable and not a lot of fast cars, but have commercial shops near the campus, and that's good for the campus too. It stabilizes the region. It gives their kids something to do and attracts people.
Right.
Yeah.
Good idea. Helen Ward writes in, I wish Hamden could take Whitney Avenue from the state so we had ownership, so we can make it more pedestrian bike friendly. Alternatively, do you think the DOT, that's the Department of Transportation, the new Lamont administration, would be more amenable to making those changes on Whitney? Now, they just named someone who ran the Metro North Railroad. Because DOT's always been the Department of Cars, and like not the Department of People or bikes or anything. Do you think Helen's got a point that you may be able to work with the Lamont administration to have more of a new urbanist Whitney Ave?
Well, hello, Helen. It is always good to hear from you. In terms of getting that because it's a federal highway. That's going to be difficult.
State highway.
State highway, yeah, state highway. It's going to be difficult to claim ownership, but hopefully the conversations between the new administration and us, we can get more done.
Mm-hmm.
Traffic lights need to be changed. Possibly talking about bike lanes, smart city streets. These are things that I'm hoping with the new administration we can do along Whitney.
Mm-hmm. Traffic lights, meaning to have them slow down more, have additional traffic lights?
Well, the intersection of Putnam and Whitney, there's kind of a blind spot where people will turn off of Putnam onto Whitney, and they won't see cars coming up Whitney, where there's plenty of times I've seen cars.
Now, I know what Helen means about the bikes. I've done that.
Yeah.
I have not felt totally safe biking around that area. And,
I bike just a little bit, probably around 10 miles a day.
yeah, you bike everywhere, Justin.
Yeah, I think that we need
Make me feel
to
old when I
we
see
need
that.
to talk to the state a little bit about Whitney Avenue. There was a plan about a year ago where they were going to turn it into a 3-lane road, a center turn lane, and then north and south lanes. So I think they do want to do something with Whitney Avenue, and if we present a plan, I think that we can work together.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we're working together on Dateline New Haven, WNHH 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. So schools, we just went through, but it's not all done. And you've been in charge of that committee, Lauren. We're going to be in Hamden. They're moving kids out of schools that are predominantly, or closing some schools because they have too many black kids according to the state's formula. So black families who live in black majority neighborhoods will have to send their kids farther away and no longer go to schools they wanted, like the Churchy School, right?
Yeah.
Because the state says you want to have an optimal percentage of white and black students together for desegregation. Did that make sense?
For me, there's a proximity politics that is going on where, in general, since Brown versus Board, there is segregation of schools has been worse.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that happens when we have these conversations, I happen to go to Spring Glen School. That's seen as one of the more privileged schools. Tons of people from Yale send their kids there.
And before you were born, wasn't it like no walls and stuff? And that
Yeah,
was really loud.
It was more of an urban school that the black and brown community would go to. And as they did redistricting, my street was a random street that they took 5 blocks and added it to Spring Glen. In this proximity politics, what we do is we say, if we have kids of color near white kids, then they'll be able to learn because their schools will get resources, rather than to say we will equitably distribute resources. And as long as our education system is tied to property, we're always going to have these problems.
Right. If housing is segregated, neighborhood schools will be segregated. So what do you think about this solution? The Hamdens was kind of pushed into this to move these kids to go farther from their neighborhood and close schools that they liked.
Pushed into it in some ways. I wasn't happy with the plan, but I understand long term. We had 10 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school.
So now you're adding a grade to the middle school.
We're adding a grade to the middle school, and we got rid of 2 schools. And I don't say that cavalierly. We had too many schools in the first place, and we're dealing with sins of the past from our ancestors. We have to undo structural racism and undo situations that happened in the past that have nothing to necessarily do with how people feel about situations now. But the idea of having the same neighborhood schools will be perpetuating a problem. And if we can't adequately speak on it, we'll continue the
What
same
I'm
patterns.
hearing from you, Justin, is that questioning of whether tracking the root of unequal education is to change the race makeup of the students. Rather, what if we just invested in Church Street School and Spring Glen and just had those schools just be strong schools, and it's okay if most of the kids are 10% more of color than this ideal.
You could
scheme.
do that. Now, there are pros and cons to that, and that's something as a community we can come to. As of right now, we are penalized by the state if we do that.
I
New
know.
Haven.
Like New Haven is closing a school, a regional magnet. That you
Yeah.
talk about perversity. The Hyde Regional Magnet School, actually, I think it was called Creed at the end. They changed it. That was created under Sheff versus O'Neill. We got state money from the state desegregation lawsuit settlement to try to desegregate schools by having regional magnets.
Just like Wintergreen.
So what we did was we created the school that people liked. So suburban kids wanted to go and urban kids. But the sick outcome was you had black and Latino families in Hamden and West Haven who wanted to go to that school. They were not allowed to go to that school because there were too many students of color according to that formula.
Yeah.
So in the end, students of color had less opportunity than white students for a good education in the definition of their parents because of this formula. Lauren, you look like you're ready to say something about this.
Yeah. So one of the problems that we have with the state guidelines is that when they're looking at your racial balance, they're looking at white versus non-white. So we have many different communities in Hamden, and one of the schools that is slated to be closed is Shepherd Glen.
Shepherd Glen, right?
And Shepherd Glen has about, I think it's like a quarter Asian, a quarter Latinx,
Yeah,
and
it's pretty much 25%
right,
of everyone.
a quarter
would seem
African
like
American,
kumbaya.
a quarter white.
Seems like a rainbow.
But now we're at 75% non-white and 25% white.
Oh.
And
See,
so,
it gets crazy. You try to fix a problem, you make it worse.
right. And
I mean,
it's,
that's insane.
it is.
I mean, I'm injecting my opinion here. You have the most integrated possible school, and it falls afoul of school integration bureaucratic formulas. That's sick. Can't you get a waiver on that? Just say, is there ever a chance to say, okay, we have rules, but can there be a clause, an idiocy clause, that this is so idiotic that it defies the reason for this rule that we can get a waiver from the state?
You can go to the state, but it's unlikely. What the state is probably going to tell you is, sure, you can do this, but pay us more money to do this. In our case, we can't afford to keep having our schools like this. I'm hoping to see at the state level changes on these policies, but long term, probably within that next 5-10 year window, 53% of our incoming kindergartners right now are kids of color.
Mm-hmm.
So the demographics are going to change, where Hamden is changing rapidly, that even asking the state to change their rules, by the time they change it,
They'll be outdated again. I think there should be an idiocy waiver. Forget the rules. Just say if something's idiotic, a bureaucrats and legislators are allowed to say this is idiotic.
I second that motion.
Now, you said it's a quarter Latinx, a quarter Asian American, a quarter African American, and a quarter white, and that's considered racially out of balance.
right.
Ooh.
But the real problem that
Because
we
they're over
have,
the 70%,
Yeah.
70-30 threshold.
the other problem that we have in Hamden is that we are paying a lot of money to keep schools open, to renovate schools, to keep up with maintenance, and all of those dollars are not going directly towards educating kids.
Mm.
So the goal with all of this redistricting is that we have less of these,
Less overhead,
maintenance.
more kid head.
yes,
And
Hopefully.
Alan Lowe writes in, how about a sanity clause rather than an idiocy clause? I'm with him. He's naming it right. And how about timing the lights on Whitney Avenue so there are no more speeders, your local crank? We always love hearing from local crank. What would the beginning of the year be like with that local crank? Because
Right.
they're often right.
again, it's a state road, and the state
You need to be working with
controls
them.
the lights. We need to work on that, but we've got to get DOT on board.
Yes,
All
we
right.
got to crank it up this year.
Okay, and we're cranking it up on Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM, and live stream newhavenimprint.org. Thanks for listening, everybody. So what about regionalism? I always think of New Haven and Hamden as the most promising site to try to move toward regionalism, saving money by combining services. The new incoming governor, Ned Lamont, says it's going to be a hallmark of administration. Do you folks see opportunities for regionalization? If so, how in the coming year?
Well, we've been looking for a place to have a shared facility for an animal shelter,
Mhm.
and haven't successfully found that location yet. So that's
So New
one
Haven
way.
currently has the one on Fernier Street, right?
Oh, I don't. In New
We
Haven,
have
I don't know.
Animal. Okay, but you think there
Yeah,
could be a share?
y'all have a animal shelter over by Southern.
Yes.
We don't share services with y'all. Sometimes if there are animals that we have
Mm-hmm.
that we can't store at North Haven, where we have 6 slots slated for animals, we'll move around between the different animal shelters. But New Haven has its own dedicated.
In New Haven, we also, a couple of years ago, right at budget time, the state said now you're going to have to pay $1 million a year to run the pretrial detention facility at our police station the state used to run. And we were hoping instead to go to Hamden and Milford and let us use some of your cells that offer and aren't in use.
Yeah, well, like
And
I
maybe pay you
know,
for that.
I don't know about the juvenile situation, but I do know for just normal criminal situations that we have an agreement between New Haven where we'll share space in our cells. For if New Haven needs those services, we'll share that.
And often, I've also heard people talk about not with New Haven, but with some other suburban town. What about a regional board of ed for a bunch of the suburban towns, including Hamden? I mean, we have 150 superintendents in the state for an area, a whole student body that's smaller than New York City's with one chancellor. They talk about 911 emergency operations centers. Were any of these on your radar?
Sure.
911 we talked about. 911 is you run into multiple problems between unions and bargaining units. You run into administration and personalities.
Yeah, little fiefdoms.
Yeah,
But you're not going to have regionalism unless you blow up some of those fiefdoms.
to have these conversations, it needs to be educating the voters and having them be able to demand these type of changes.
And usually when there's a referendum, it's the people who are the most invested in the status quo who turn out the people to vote in those referendums.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Lauren?
I think that we need to look at every possible way we can save money in Hamden. Our budget is very expensive, and I'm willing to look at anything.
And yeah, we talked about transitioning now the budget. One big issue is that you have a structural deficit the way New Haven does, and part of the reason as a New Haven is you haven't been funding your pensions. They're only 9% funded. So every year to balance your budget, you do this most recent year, capital sweeps, meaning you do one-time sweep of money that wasn't spent on capital projects, which raises the question of if the money was intended that you borrowed to be spent on building something, should you really be spending it to keep the government going? Or are you delaying questions as tough for most cities and towns to do about how you're going to pay for government year to year? I know you've both been raising that a lot. You're dipping into your operating budget that way. You went $123 million in pension obligation bonds 4 years ago to increase payments to pay that off. How do you tackle the root issue? How do you get the bills paid without one-time gimmicks year to year?
You have to plan for these bills. So that's the problem that we have had over the last several budgets. Revenues that are way too optimistic are getting put into our budget so that when we go to balance the budget at the end of the year, these revenues haven't come in because they're never going to come in. And then we have to use these gimmicks to balance the budget.
Right.
So capital sweeps, there were salaries in the administration that were bonded.
Wow. New Haven, we once sold the same school 3 times, quote unquote, sold it to balance our budget and show the revenue, the old Lee High School.
Yeah. So the salaries that were bonded, a portion of the salary was attributed to a project, and then so like the mayor's salary, 30% of it was bonded.
Wow.
And
I sympathize with people making those decisions because people go crazy now in America if you ever raise their taxes. And it's legitimate that because of the Airlines property tax system in Connecticut, it's very expensive tax-wise to own a house in Hamden or New Haven.
Is.
But on the other hand, we used to see taxes as the communal way that we fund stuff that makes us all stronger, whether it's schools or roads or clean water. Given that people go crazy if you raise their taxes, given that you can't pay for government, in addition to planning in general, what are some ways out? Is there stuff government shouldn't do anymore, or are there new revenue sources we haven't thought of?
well, we need to make sure that we're looking to the state to for grants for projects that we can
But the
do.
state still has these ongoing deficits, and we're about to hit another recession.
Of course they do, but there are still grants that are offered, and we need to
Mhm.
make sure that we're scooping those up when we can. So better communication with our legislators, and we can't really take on too many projects unless they are very critical.
And you
without
talk about in the
grant
schools
funding.
having fewer buildings.
Well,
Right.
general investment. I think something that I've definitely seen and learned since being on council, you have to invest in things. And if you don't invest in things, if they deteriorate, you have
And
to spend more
and
money.
then you don't grow when you have a bigger bill later.
Or you have to spend more money for infrastructure. Simply, I know that if I pave a sidewalk now, 15, 20 years from now, to put down that same sidewalk, it's going to be more expensive. And those are things that you have to think about long term. And
Mm-hmm.
you have to go to the community and have those conversations. But we also need, I feel too often in politics, we have smart politicians and we have compassionate activists and citizens. We need it to be the other way around. We need people to be compassionate, to say, tell me what you need. And we need citizens to say, I want to see this. And they should have the ability to see that way before budget time. And they should be able to meet with us and have those meetings.
And be aware of the trade-offs, the tough choices you make when you.
Because by the
get
time we
something you
get
want.
to budget time, the conversations are yes or no. Or this has already been promised, this hasn't been promised. And it pits the community against each other rather than to say, what do we as a community value and what do we feel we should invest more in now and what can we invest in later?
All right, and we're talking about that conversation on Dateline New Haven with just a few minutes left with Lauren Garrett and Justin Farmer. 2019, if you had to pick two priorities each of you have for this coming year, what would they be?
Regionalization and transparency. Regionalization in the sense of working together with other municipalities and having a better communication and better partnership. And transparency, there needs to be better access for anyone to get information on how their government works.
Any thoughts on how that'll happen? Because I know what you're referring to from the end of last year. Oh, we have some more questions too. We have to get to it and see those.
One way I feel I've been Facebook living our council meetings.
Great idea.
People say, oh, you can already find it on public access. Some people don't find that accessible.
Facebook much better. Facebook, I see you're doing it. And politicians are becoming media outlets. I mean,
Right.
information sources. No one knows social media better than Justin, right?
Oh, okay.
if you want to find out what's happening in Hamden, even just for fun, or where the next rally is, that you go to Justin Farmer Facebook.
Hey.
And that's not a bad development in politics, right? I mean, look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, how she's
fantastic.
raised some issues that are happening in Washington through social media following, just going to a bar and finding out the bartender was an unpaid intern on the Hill, and the next day they started getting paid.
Wow.
I mean, that's media without the middleman.
Right.
How about those are great. And how about your priorities, Lauren?
I totally agree about the transparency. We need to work on that. We need to make sure that we can get information, that the community can get information. And I'd also like to see us get real about our debt. We've got to make sure that this next budget cycle is really tackling the debt, making sure that we're paying, full into our pension, the ARC payment. It's the actuarial required contribution
For pensions.
Right, and we need to make sure that we're paying that 100%. We need to pay our debt 100%, and then our operating budget is it's expensive, and we need to be realistic about our expenses and our revenues.
All right. And Brian Anderson says, what an informative conversation. Lauren, Justin, and Paul. Brian, who grew up in Hamden. Hamden residents are represented by you, too. Thank you, Brian. Sonia Marie. So look at the last question, even though it doesn't make like a neat ending on the icing on the cake for the show, just so everyone gets heard. Do you have any intentions on taking on Hamden's homeless problems or just shipping them to New Haven?
Oh, we are.
Tell it like it is, Sonia Marie.
So I've gone to the homeless march last year where you had me on Dateline last
Right, anytime
year.
there's a New Haven march, Justin will.
And I was there this year, and we are going to be opening up a warming center.
Warming centers at a series of churches under contract with Columbus House.
Mhm.
And I think the first church is on Dixwell. Is it near Arch?
Yeah.
Is that the one?
But we're also going to put up a brick and mortar situation in the town at some point.
You
So
mean a permanent shelter?
a permanent, a warming center, because there's stipulations.
Your warming center is not where you get a cot. It means you can hang there overnight when there's an emergency. At some places like the church that used to do it in New Haven on Gough Street, used to actually have volunteers cooking food for people all night.
Okay.
But it keeps you safe. And if you
Right.
don't want to go a shelter with the rules, you can just hang there overnight and not die.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
In
then
the
that's
afternoon.
that's something.
Is this the
that
first time for the warming shelters in New Haven, in Hamden?
Yes, this is the first time. Alice Cunningham of Columbus
Allison, yeah,
House
is going to be the
She-
contractor.
She's going to be one of those contractors, and their team has been working with us to find people in Hamden in the spots where they are. And this is something that personally I
And
always
Sonia Marie says, okay, warming isn't addressing homelessness.
This is true. I work on affordable housing. I feel that we need more adequate housing, and that's part of the root problem. You can find me offline, and I definitely would love to conversate more about this.
Lauren.
Yeah, we're addressing the symptom and not the cure, but it's a step in the right direction. We do need more affordable housing, and more jobs closer to Hamden.
Okay. Well, I learned so much in 45 minutes here and 51 seconds, talking with, starting the year off right
Hey,
with the fresh eyes on the Hamden Legislative Council, Lauren Garrett and Justin Farmer. Thank you so much for joining us on Dateline New Haven. Thanks, everybody, for sending in those great questions. We're going to have the start of the year just right, and thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience,
Hey.
an example of a Hamden New Haven group, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven and Hamden's home
hey.
for community radio.